We're glad to have you for that. We'll share this presentation, the critical parts, but it does not include participant images, nor does it include any information from the breakout sessions. So please use the chat for questions. We'll get to some of them in various places, but I've got a compilation of questions and answers to date on the partnership's website. If you are able to if you remember to put like 2 or 3 question marks in front of your question, it helps us determine which are questions that need to be addressed. We'd be grateful for that. I'm going to turn it over to Dan for a second to give some takeaways from these, but I just wanted to go through the quick series. So the first workshop we did in mid-January was an introduction to restorative development and to the feasibility study we're doing, and the initial set of key performance indicators. The second workshop later in January addressed still around findings from the feasibility study, focusing on equity and the remaining key performance indicators. So at the end we had 11. Today's is focused on alignment and moving forward, and then workshop 4, which is yet to be scheduled, which will be by invitation to partners for action planning. So Dan, you wanted to talk about a few takeaways.
Sure, thanks, Anne. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today with during the series of these workshops. It's been really great to have this much participation. And key takeaways that I see from the initial workshops here and what we're working through. We've early on, we illustrated a clear need for a systemic change, really, that restorative development will address and to resolve the inequities that we're facing today. We have a chance to face we had a chance here to face the reality of what it means to have our neighborhood that we live in, if it were to represent the average quality of life in Minneapolis neighborhoods today. And I think we all know as a result that we can do better than that. We can do it better than what that reality is. We've compared this living situation in that would be like to national, international examples, and we know it's possible to meet the equitable values that we prescribe to, but it's going to take this restorative systemic change that we've been talking about in these workshops. Preliminary engineering and design results of the first phase of the feasibility study has shown that restorative development is technically feasible. It's not a question of, is it possible to do this sort of thing? It's more a question of, do we have the will to do so? We've also have discussed many of the aspects of the restorative design process, which starts with restorative baseline and the city's performance today. As I say many times, or as I think of that, to me, that's just when I walk into wilderness areas, to go hiking with my boys, get to a campsite, I always point out to them, we got to know where we're starting out on this map and have some landmarks in mind as we're going along. Otherwise, we're not going to get to where we need to be. So it's as basic as that, but it's really a key aspect of advancing and changing how we're doing the work we're doing. We also have seen how the design process can really reveal the pockets of inequity that's occurring in our communities today, and how that can provide a way to restore equity in those communities and across the city. So I think this is a powerful story we have to share with each other and work together on. And I think one of the most significant things that I heard even at the start of the workshops was a comment that really, as community organizations, governmental and private sector organizations, this doesn't mean we have to change everything we're doing. It just says, it's just pivoting a little bit towards our communities to empower them and to find where we have these gaps, inequities existing in the system, and change that for the better. So I think that's kind of a key things I think we should all be thinking about as we continue to work through. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for that, Dan. I appreciate it. Those perspectives are always really important. Today's workshop is pretty straightforward. So focusing on aligning goals and the framework around that concept in order to advance restorative development. So we'll get through this introduction. We'll jump into the feasibility study dimensions with our consultants, Katja Yeagers and Björgvin Severson from Yorth Group. We also have a couple of other members of the consulting team on the call today. We'll do some initial road mapping and a preview for phase 2, quantifying this notion of return on investment, and then getting to restorative development. We've got an exercise there. Especially I want to draw your attention to this last segment in the last, say 40, 45 minutes of this workshop. We'll do some major information on goals alignment and integration, and we're going to be doing about a 30-minute exercise and breakout sessions. Those are predetermined based on expertise and arenas. That's where those of you who've been really hungry to start thinking through next steps are going to have a chance to get going on that work. So please prepare accordingly. So you'll be able to be available for that, because that's going to be pretty awesome. So I'm going to turn this over to our Yorth consulting team.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think you have to turn my video on if people want to see me. Otherwise, I'll try to sound even better.
You can just start that yourself.
Okay, I just did. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so in summary, this project has been a technical feasibility study for integrated utility systems, but also for restorative development. And so in phase 1, quick summary on that, we completed a baseline assessment for restorative development. And in this assessment, we qualified and quantified city performance across 11 key performance areas throughout, in those areas of city functions. So as you remember from the previous workshop, some of you who weren't there, these were areas of utilities, and then into community performance, internet, artificial intelligence, mobility, land use and planning, economy, health and well-being, and eventually culture and identity. And then we completed an assessment for integrated utility hub and utility systems. So that included conceptual technical analysis, where the Ramboll Orascom team also explored the input sources for the integrated utility hub and the material and the resource flows. And this work resulted in a technical system summary and the confirmation that the integrated utility hub is technically feasible. Phase 2, that's our next steps, will include a design and a co-creation. So this is not a place where one entity is going to design something for everybody else. It's a place where everyone comes together, where stakeholders come together to produce together what we want. And we're going to determine definition of success together. And a part of this work in phase 2 is going to include restorative strategies and a roadmap. For those of you who are used to working with roadmaps, those are going to be really, can be complex, and it's going to be a lot of work. So just heads up, not that you don't know that all already. Design, so in the next phase, schematic of restorative and circular infrastructure. And I know because there are some people with us today that haven't seen all this before, but on this visual, so this is just a fun sketch of what can be. This is not really site specific. This could be Minneapolis-wise, it could be county-wise or statewide. This can be scaled to any, down to any mean and up to any mean. This includes integrated utility hubs that will process, convert waste to value, but it will connect to all sorts of other functions where small businesses at neighborhood level are going to feed off this material, resource flows, convert it to better value, more valuable proposition. That's where the jobs are going to be created and the wealth. But then you also see visuals of biodomes. So you can imagine biodomes in the world are sometimes processing gray water and other resources within districts and cities. So this is where urban agriculture can take place within the districts. So you imagine 4-season facilities in our cold weather climate. So this is an idea for how this can take place, but we are not going to be a Mr. and Mrs. Know-it-all consultants. This is something that we want to create with you. This is something that we're going to decide the details on together. And that's in the next phase. Here is just an idea for the roadmap. We allowed ourselves to pretend we can think 50 years into the future. That's the top line. But very importantly, we break it into 5-year increments in this visual, in this model. So every 5 years, we're going to determine what's going to happen within each 5-year period. We can be very detailed in the first 5 years. We can be somewhat detailed in the first 10 years, even 15, 20 years, because infrastructure can have 30 to 40, 50-year lifespan. But after that, we're not going to be so detailed. So we're going to put emphasis on what happens in the first maybe 2-3 increments of this roadmap. So as you see there in the lower table, the detailed roadmap in 5-year increments, when we look at water systems, energy systems, food systems, material management, access to equity, etc., there are 100 categories there. And then what we want out of it, that all of these have to have measurable goals, because we need to be able to communicate progress clearly, and we need to determine together what's all this going to be. What's the milestone? What do we want to achieve every 5 years? What's going to happen every year during those 5 years? And it's going to go down to who does what, where, how, who pays for what, who owns it, does the owner govern? So we have to answer these big questions. But that's going to happen or start taking place in the next phase of the project.
All right. With that, good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone again. We are going to move into our section that is about the quantifying the ROI of restorative development. And we're going to start with a recap of some numbers that we presented in the last workshop. So if you've missed those, this is your lucky day. We'll get to go through them again. If you've seen them already, apologies for that, but hopefully it'll help you think through these again and help you learn some of these numbers in more detailed way, because last time we went through it pretty quickly as well. So here's an example of the education and income gap. So what we've done is before we get to the ROI for the entire city, we have created a case study that compares a specific neighborhood, Hawthorne-McKinley, 9,000 residents in North Minneapolis, to another neighborhood in South Minneapolis with 8,000 people that started out the same way in the 1930s, 1920s, which is the kind of the first data that we have available, and then diverged. So some of the following slides will give you an insight into that neighborhood comparison and should set the context for the bigger numbers that we'll see for the city as a whole in subsequent slides. So one of the things we've done is to look into education and income gap between these two neighborhoods. And we've contrasted census data from both of these, as I said, going back to the 1930s. And when we talk about the education and income gap, there's at least 2 gaps to consider when we look at where we're at today. Number one is really closing the education opportunity gap. So if Hawthorne-McKinley College degree rates were the same as those in Hiawatha-Ho, 1,000 more people would hold degrees, college degrees, and together they would earn an additional $45 million per year based on having those degrees. So that figure alone is pretty impressive for 1,000 people, but it doesn't even account for the difference in pay that people in North Minneapolis receive compared to those living in South Minneapolis, even if they hold the same degrees. So that's our second gap, and that would be around closing the income disparity gap. So if the 3,600 Hawthorne-McKinley residents with either a high school, associate, or bachelor degree actually earned the same incomes as those in Hiawatha-Ho, together they would earn $15 million more per year. So hypothetically, $15 million per year translates to adding 440 homeowners to that neighborhood, or more than 500 four-year degrees every year. And again, think about this is a neighborhood of 9,000 people. So if we were able to fix this, close this gap, we would make progress fairly quickly. And we hope these numbers help illuminate why we think this neighborhood district level approach to creating training and living wage jobs is so important and potentially so effective. All right, here is another number, another calculation that we've done, again for Hawthorne-McKinley as well. We call this the quality of life gap. So the orange bars are the metro area's average annual household expenses. So in 2018, they're around $72,000 per household. And the lines are median incomes. If you look at the blue line, again, that's Hawthorne-McKinley, you will see that diverge over time. And you'll notice that in 2018, the average household income in Hawthorne-McKinley covers only about half of the average metro income. So incomes for Hawthorne-McKinley households would have to double to reach the average quality of life in the metro area. So here we've done a thought experiment to understand how far away collectively the 9,000 residents of the neighborhood are from the average quality of life. So multiplying the average annual expense times 9,000 minus the collective median income gives us a figure of $91 million that we call the quality of life gap. So that's a gap that's partially covered by people scaling back their expenses, of course, but also by increased household debt, by increased public spending, public support. And it gives us a sense of not only the public costs, but also the potential opportunity that we have by raising incomes to the average. So that really gives us a sense of the economic opportunity in that neighborhood, but then also for the city as a whole. So we've applied that same calculation to the city of Minneapolis as a whole. So the bottom 30% of households earn less than 35,000 K annually. Together, these 55,000 households are $2.8 billion short of reaching the area's average standard of living. And again, this is just a glimpse of the opportunity of building a more equitable economy that offers true living wage jobs for all.
Oh, all right. So how do we get there? There's a sensitive topic of living wages that is, it's not the easiest job that people at the government level take on, and it's a struggle everywhere in the world. And yet the city of Minneapolis has committed to living wages, and they established living wages, not just the city alone, but others also, at $15 an hour. So as you can read on this slide, if an individual works 40 hours per week, every week of the year, with no vacation, that equals 2,080 hours for an income of $31,200 before taxes. And for those of us who understand the 2040 goals, where people are supposed to have access, there's going to be an access at literally all levels, access for all. Race, gender, everything. With an income of $31,200 before taxes, cost of health, education, access to work, services, etc. It doesn't take. I think we understand that it's not doable. That's why we established something we called restorative wages, and these restorative wages are really figuring in quality of life, the basic fundamental human needs. Because if we don't have restorative wages, if we always compare to living wages, the city is going to experience externalities. The city is going to have economic pains as a consequence. The city is basically always paying for the balance of industry getting away with paying under market rate wages. So restorative wages in this context have been established in this project at $38 an hour for an annual income of $79,200 before taxes. So this would cover the cost of living, vacation time, and 10% savings for emergencies, retirement, and incidentals. I want to give you some statistics. So I'm going to read it for you, and I have to ask you to bear with me because I know statistics are really difficult to digest. But I'm going to be quick here and try to be clear. The significance of this is that most Americans live paycheck to paycheck today. Between 60 to 80% of them, depending on some surveys that we examined very well. An often cited survey states that 40% of Americans could not cover unexpected bills of $400 without going into debt. 23% of Americans have zero emergency savings. That's almost 1 in 4, guys. 15% of American households have no retirement savings. That's 1 in 6 has no retirement savings. And another 29% of households have a median retirement balance of $1,100. That's about 44% of American households cannot afford retirement. So that's why restorative wages are an absolutely critical component of restorative development. If we don't do it, we are facing crisis that we're going to argue is bigger than the climate crisis we're dealing with. And this is upon us very, very soon. So we just want to point that out because it is extremely important to keep this in mind as we move on with this project. That every little thing we do is a component that that hedges us against this problem, that builds strength in the system to get there. And then we have to ask ourselves, how can we do this? And it's always about money, isn't it? We must be able to afford a change. And so we're going to build this argument here that you see on the slide in front of you on what Kathy was introducing for McKinley neighborhood in Minneapolis, and then what she showed you, the $2.8 billion quality of life gap. But here we're going to put it in context with an increase in the tax base. The quality of life gap, $2.8 billion. We didn't want to put a number on it yet. We want to do it with you in phase 2, what this means for the city. What is a taxable income for city, county, and state? But as you can tell, it's going to be a significant amount. In the lower category, when we redevelop neighborhoods, when we even make a commitment to redevelopment in a neighborhood, and it's going to be of the green kind, not to mention if it's going to be on a restorative circular economic kind, that neighborhood is instantly going to grow in value. So we applied the calculation for each home in the city that is living, where households are living at under average. And we're going to look at these 55,000 households, and we're going to assume $5,000 increase per year. And it's going to get us to a $2.75 billion. So that's an increase in the tax base. And compared to 1.8% property tax in the county, that would add up to almost $50 million. So you see, this is new income that is realized every year once we get there. Then we're going to, in the next phase, we're going to determine what's going to happen every year as we build the roadmap. What is the increase? What are the gains every year? And how can this money be redirected? How can we direct capital to solving a problem versus treating the symptom? And so those are the big questions we're going to answer in phase 2. And definitely, like Dan alluded to earlier, the current linear economic model does not scale further to support the level of well-being and competitiveness that the city requires through the next 100 years. So I think that is really important that we keep that in mind. And if you remember from the previous workshops, that this baseline assessment exposed the fact that the city has been losing equity every year, almost every year, for the past 80 years. So people working in the city today inherited a culture and a problem that is going to be a lot of work to get out of. But we can get out of it, but only when we're intentional about it and we do this together. And I want to say here, importantly, just repeat what Dan said earlier, that we have learned that incremental changes do not yield the desired results when the system is broken. So let's leave it at that for this slide. Public-private sector alignment. This is key in circular economic development. This is key in restorative development. And people from the community, be patient with us. We are going to start with public-private sector. It is equally important, public community, public utilities, public developers. We're going to get into that later. But we're going to focus a little bit here on the public-private sector alignment, because it is the private sector that's going to create where the jobs are going to be created. And this must be a directed, mindful, thoughtful process that we want to manage. It cannot be left to chance. So this is really about who takes the first step. We have established in this project that the project team recommends the city taking the first step. But in order to take the right step, the city should be really mindful and completely aware of what it has to offer. When the city builds a certain infrastructure that is going to be very beneficial to industry, businesses and industries, the city must be able to stop those economic leakages that are caused by industries. These economic leakages come in economic pains at the government level in the form of paying the difference between low wages and cost of living. It covers the balance between stress and overworked workers who need social help. They're worn out. A lot of people are worn out. It bears the difference of environmental pollution that needs to be fixed. So this is stuff that cities and governments just take for granted. It's just a part of the budget, environmental cleanup, social costs. So we have to have a mindful and intentional effort by the public sector to align the disaligned pieces, the silos, and we're going to break up the silos, and we need to come together and learn to prioritize together. At the same time, the industry is equally dispersed. They need to come together and learn what they need to ask for from the city. But the ultimate goal is to stop externalities and to these economic leakages. So we can maybe move on to the next slide. Katja,
All right.
you're going to lead us through a little practice
I will.
here?
Yes. So this is where we move on to starting to talk about roles and responsibilities in restorative development. So we'd like to dive into each of these sectors with you. Jorth will share a perspective on roles and responsibilities of each of these sectors. Just please keep in mind that we're going to keep this very generic and very general for now. Later on, we'll dig into specific stakeholders, specific organizations, but for now, we're really talking about these as actors in a general context. So for example, industry means industry and businesses in the US or global scale. Communities, hopefully what we say there resonates with you about in terms of the typical neighborhood in America, but your own community might feel and look very, very differently. So just wanted to make sure we set that context that we are staying very general for now, and then we'll dive deeper into more specific geographic areas and specific organizations later in the project. So we will share our perspective on each of these, and then after some of them, we'll make sure that we open it up to the room for you to give comments and add on to what we're proposing as roles and responsibility, past versus the future restorative development. So with that, back to Björgvin to talk about government and cities as well.
Thank you, Kati. Past and current states of government. So I'm going to read off the slide with you. Increasing funding gaps. But while we read through this together, then think about, put your own thoughts. See if you have your own thoughts about what's good, what's bad, what's missing in the current state of government. Imperative to maintain decade-old infrastructure. I know there are a lot of people in the room today that have tried to make a change, to change the system. But we have a culture that doesn't allow it. We don't, it's really easy to say there isn't money to do that. We hear that a lot in the country, in the one country on earth where everything is possible. How is it that we can say that? Growing socioeconomic problems, that's a fact. We know that in Minneapolis. Why is that? Why is that? 80 years, 100 years of losing equity without measuring for it. Lack of control over which kind of industries and jobs settle in the area. This is an area where governments, often cities, states, they have economic development. Part of the economic development strategies is to offer tax incentives to big enterprises because they hire employees. Of course, that's an important part of that economic mix, but the externalities aren't accounted for. A lot of industries and companies, businesses, they ask for a permission to pollute. They ask for permission to pay lower wages than they have to elsewhere. And we don't calculate the externalities of that. The balance is paid by the government. This balance just doesn't go away because it goes into or out of a different pocket. It's still it should be a part of the economic mix, and this is an integral part of restorative economic financing. So in governance, structures lead to investments in the problem and not the solution. You see, automatically we apply budgets to affordable housing programs, to health, social care, MinCare, all these, health, etc. But we, at the same time, we can't make the argument that we need to invest in the solution. Solution is about equity, and how do we get equity? It's through access, true access to education, to jobs, to health, to ownership. Ownership is really important in terms of intergenerational wealth. So that's why we have to learn. This project helps us learn about how we begin to invest in the solution. And over time, we learn to shift capital and resources from treating the symptoms to treating the solution. This will not happen overnight. We are aware of that, we realize, but that's the path of restorative development. Let's go to the next slide, Kati, and talk about where we're going, the future state of the city and region. So now we're talking about district level restorative development, circular economic approach that stops equity loss. Because now we know about equity loss. We know what that does. And we know that it's really, really expensive. You see, back in the day, they didn't calculate that. It wasn't a part of the economic calculations, and it wasn't a part of the political agenda. Today it is. And we need to generate equity that can be reinvested. When communities say, bringing that message to us, they are saying we need ownership. But we now know through this project that ownership by community means actually incredible income for the state. So intentional infrastructure development attracts high quality jobs and employers. So we're not going to just continue investing in the old system that we know doesn't scale any longer. I hope we agree on that by now. It doesn't scale. We need a different infrastructure, but when we are changing the infrastructure, we need to know what exactly are we designing it for? Which exact industries and businesses do we want to attract? We cannot let that or leave that up to chance. Workforce training, and this is really important. Workforce training happens in tandem together with infrastructure investment to meet the needs of underserved populations. You see, we cannot just have jobs over here and then they got to take a bus for an hour and a half. People that have children and can barely afford the bus ride. So that doesn't work. So education work has to be in the same location. This is where University of Minnesota, other educational institutions and nonprofits, NGOs have a big role to play and a big responsibility. The governance in this sort of a system depends on measurable equity gain. Measurable, I underline measurable. This goes intact with measurable goals to establish measurable goals, which we did already in phase 1. We have those goals, it's measurable. And so that allows for investment in the solution. And as I mentioned earlier, definition of success is to be determined, because that's not for a consultant to pretend to know or to decide for others, but we decide that together. So let's go to the next one, if you'd be so kind. Now the industry perspective. How does the industry experience this? What's going on in the world today? And so past and current state, the industry and businesses, big corporations or companies have never been a part of the sustainability solution. They never really had a vote on what kind of infrastructure to play. They've been really busy trying to be sustainable, many industries, trying to be sustainable in their own silo, in their own corner with a broken infrastructure that doesn't help them out in that sense. So industries are experiencing increased resource insecurity. So that's a part of the program. That is, we need to, as a government or as a public sector, we need to understand what are we designing for. Understanding pains and benefits of business and industry is really important. So governance at the industry level is to ask for a permit to cause externalities. As I mentioned earlier, pollution, low wages, unemployment can be experienced and paid for by government, long work hours, stress, etc., etc. So short-term vision attracts short-term shareholders. This is really, really important. That's why American businesses are threatened by, they have to sell off plants, they have to move things off their balance sheet. You see, they have to move their assets and their equity into cash so that they can maintain and pay dividends to their owners. So they can't make long-term decisions, which is absolutely critical to be sustainable. So by design, industry, in their effort to make dividends for the shareholders, they can't be sustainable. And that's because of the infrastructure and governance systems that we live by. So key driver for industry is to basically to please the shareholders. But what's going on in the world today? These are just some of the massive amount of headlines where literally trillions of dollars are moving from the old economy to the new one. And so you see, and this one doesn't even include Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, $300 billion commitment to sustainability. Some of the top development banks in the world increasing their sustainability agenda. Long story short, there is more capital available for projects than there are projects qualifying for this sustainability earmarked capital. So a lot of opportunity there. Future state of industry, industrial symbiotic infrastructure, that's what we've been talking about all throughout the project and these workshops. Resource security through closed and localized resource loops. This is important for us because that's where we create the jobs and the community wealth, and everyone benefits. Governance anticipates and complies with environmental and social regulations. So this is industry is now under much more social pressure than they have ever been under. Pleasing the shareholder is no longer the only objective. Long-term vision attracts long-term shareholders. Again, an absolute must for longevity of business today and survival. Access to less expensive capital through environmental and social compliance. So that's a fact. Socially and environmentally compliant companies have access to cheaper capital. So that's a big deal for them. Key driver, socialized to operate. This is part, the significance of this is that what we build and what we develop in the city in our region is going to attract these businesses that are looking for that opportunity. Kati. So, oh yeah, I'm going to finish this one. Government and industry, what else? So here we want you to think about this, and government makes a public commitment, takes the first steps, makes the first investments, as we talked about, to the goals that we are going to establish, build circular infrastructure that attracts the right kind of industry and supports innovation. And innovation is a massive, massive opportunity. We have Tom Fisher, University of Minnesota, with us today. He sits on a box of the magic box there. But Minnesota is one of the most creative place on earth. So there is no shortage of that. Industry connects with and expands circular economic infrastructure. They're seeking that. They're looking for it. And most of the time they can't find it. Create jobs and provides a market for small and medium-sized enterprises. These are our local businesses, new and existing. Anne, you want to take it from here?
Just inviting people to contribute their ideas. What is missing? What else are you thinking about for government or industry? Because they're closely connected. We've got some ideas, and you just heard a bunch from Björgvin's presentation. Feel free to drop them into the chat or unmute yourself and speak up if you would like. Who's got some other ideas? Roles and responsibilities, opportunities for government and industry. Any of our partners have any thoughts on this they'd like to add? Björgvin and Kati, are there any other thoughts that you've had?
I'll just say that if there's things that the city or the government is already doing that aligns with this vision, that would be really interesting to hear as well. Or industry.
Sabina said socio-economic adoption of neighborhoods by the private sector. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it was in workshop 1 where we covered, what kind of jobs, or in workshop 2 when we talked about artificial intelligence, which are the first jobs to go away, to be lost to artificial intelligence, being low-skilled jobs. But technology is moving so fast, and importantly, it's getting less expensive. So it's getting into, it's not just low-wage jobs. It's throughout almost any field. We mentioned the fact that some universities, MIT and others, Stanford, talk about which side do you want to work on? Do you want to be told what to do by the machine, or do you want to tell the machine what to do? Who makes the higher income?
Thank you. Interesting comments being posted about changes in U.S. climate policy, industry driving innovation in response to customer interests, needs, demands. Shifts in how to shift tax rates to have different kinds of impact.
Mm-hmm.
Good, thank you. These are helpful. I know it always takes a minute for people to kick into a participation mode, so I appreciate your attempts here. Give it another minute or so. Interesting. Looking at conversations with between government and private sector to help reach or help achieve some of the intensive rules and regulations. We certainly heard in the last few days about the big car makers having a conversation with the federal government about not shying away, not resisting regulations, but charting a path forward together rather than it being imposed.
I can give a meaningful context to that. There's a contrast, for example, between the US and Europe in terms of circular economy. In Europe, circular economy is led by governments. There's a massive commitment by the European Union to circular economy and all the member nations. But enterprises, industries, companies in Europe are not as quick to pick it up. Conversely, in the US, government is not really interested in the circular economy because we've been a lot about less regulations, but industry is, the US industries, companies are much faster to pick circular economy up than their European counterparts. And why is that? Because this loose regulatory environment does not give them comfort. It causes all sorts of problems when they work in the global markets.
The unpredictability of it can be really challenging.
Yeah, and they struggle with their shareholders because of it.
Yep. Some great comments in the chat. Thanks much. Let's go to the next arena here.
Yeah, and actually, Jeff, your comment around government needs to provide the bridge for industry to make the change. I think this is relevant to our next slide as well. So developers. Developers operate in a high-risk industry, obviously, and they are lacking the public infrastructure that would support the creation of breakthrough developments. And they truly cannot be expected to do this on their own. And need closer alignment with cities to get to where we all want to be. They are experiencing the affordable housing mandate, and if they comply with it, if they want to comply with it, they're often facing very onerous financing mechanisms. So having to patch different grants together that are on very different timelines, sometimes it can take years to line that financing up when an opportunity may have been missed to actually build affordable housing by then. One thing that's very specific to our area here is we've heard that there are some barriers to effectively developing mixed industrial and residential zone parcels. So I think from a restorative perspective, we're all very excited about the fact that Minneapolis has new zoning and has places now where industry and residents can live close to each other. But we need to figure out how do we actually develop those parcels meaningfully. And again, developers cannot be expected to do this on their own. And then lastly, they have few incentives to invest in the public realm beyond the amenities that they're creating for their own residents. Also, developers in the US, they also, we apply the same thinking around permit to cause externalities. So market-based pricing does lead to gentrification. But the question is, the developers alone are not at fault here. It's the widening inequality that we're experiencing socioeconomically that's really the root of this. And then, we've all seen developments that don't always meet community needs as well as an externality. Most developers operate under, or many operate under short-term imperatives. They need to compete with large national competitors in a pretty opportunistic market where large competitors can just move their money elsewhere if the city is not giving them what they want. So I know this is a pretty cursory journey here, and I'm sure there's much that our developers in the room would add or correct here. But really, this is an industry where commonly the definition of success is needing to get to rapid payback and also to rapid scale of your business. So in terms of how we see that change, we think that there's an opportunity for circular district developments to implement new kinds of public and private partnerships. where publicly funded blue-green mobility and also waste management infrastructure allows for actually environmentally sound developments. So the idea being that the city has to commit to pitching in creating this public infrastructure so that developers actually can deliver to better developments. Hopefully in the restorative system, we would all welcome the reduce in demand for affordable housing because wages would go up. And then in terms of governance, we just see a big opportunity for, because there's going to be mutually shared benefits from the circular economy, that would enable the city and developers to create new ways to collaborate, to fund things, to regulate, and also new ways to beautify our cities together. So the definition of success, as so many other things, we want to leave that up for the future to co-develop and co-create with our partners in the room. So in terms of what we want to bring forward as some of the roles and actions by developers, number one, just showing a willingness to invest in new models where they know that doing good is rewarded with lower risk and other incentives. And we hope that they would be strong advocates for green and blue infrastructure that benefits the community. So both in terms of climate resilience and also public amenities. And then we also would like to see them to be strong advocates for new materials management and energy infrastructures. So right now, as we've covered in previous sessions, even building waste is just not managed very well by any of us, and the infrastructure just doesn't exist to reclaim and reuse materials very efficiently. So we want to see that change and hope that developers are asking for that more and more.
So again, other thoughts, please drop them into the chat, as well as unmute yourselves and speak out if you would like. As before, we'll give you a couple minutes to think about it. Thanks. So looking specifically for anything else around developers and specific roles and responsibilities, opportunities, choices. Developers in the room are welcome to contribute their perspectives and encouraged to do so. Great to see active chat conversations about a wide variety of things. Any thoughts anybody'd like to add for the developers?
I was going to type it, but it's easier just to talk.
Please do, Jeff.
I guess the only thing I would say is that we throw out the term developers, and I get it, right? We all are out to make millions of dollars and pillage and rape the environment, but most of us aren't really wanting to do that, and we are trying to find ways to do it. But in the current environment with, right, land value, construction costs, whatever, when you want to build a project, there is no way to do so and include huge investments in new public realm, new infrastructure, new blue, green, creating all these public amenities without somebody helping to do that. And again, I don't want to say it should all fall on the cities or the governments to do so, but if you want to see change, there has to be. I can't go to a bank and borrow money on building a park because there's no return on investment per se that I can quantify on building a park. There's intrinsic value in having a development that's closer to a park, but I can't quantify that and borrow on that. And margins are slim on projects with current costs that go with them. So I just offer that up as an example, maybe.
Oh, thanks for sharing it. It's a notion that came up earlier, right, about not only lack of incentives, but often perverse incentives, right? Incentives that are set up to actually get the opposite, unintentionally, of course, set up to get the opposite of what is desired. All righty, thanks. Let's move on to the next section.
All right. And thank you for all the nuances. Please keep them coming too, because we are generalizing a lot. Even more so on this next slide where we talk about utilities. And keep in mind, this is around creating closed loops both for energy and water. So when we say utilities, we're not just talking electricity. We're talking all public utilities, which includes water as well. So some pretty high-level slides here, but in terms of what we've covered in previous sessions on the past and current state, we all know that we have a very strong and very reliable infrastructure, but it's also centralized and siloed. So for example, water, we had talked about how that is split into 3 different systems, and for good reasons. But there are certainly opportunities to connect those better into the future. Energy and water are not currently connected either. So each of these operate in their linear systems, and that just naturally leads to losses. The inability to close loops, and also the inability to scale to future needs, as we'll see later on. I think the permit to pollute, that is, again, something we see with all industries. Obviously, regulations have gotten tighter and tighter, and we're now at very, very high standards. But because we're purists, if you're still allowed to pollute by 0.1%, it's going to show up in the system as an externality. But certainly utilities, especially energy utilities, but water as well, have shown an ability to comply with different mandates, with different renewable energy mandates. And some of them are doing so very aggressively. But almost all of them, I should say, are still struggling with how do we actually get to that very deep decarbonization, that last 10 to 20%. And so for all of the utilities, the definition of success, and that is one that we all as consumers expect and share, is to get low cost service, but reliable service as well. So we want it to be cheap, but we want it to be reliable. So that's been the mandate that a lot of utilities have operated under. Okay, looking very far into the future, we will certainly see a move towards a more decarbonized and less centralized energy system. We think utilities will play an increasing role in creating connectivity between electricity, between heating, and the transportation sectors to reduce losses. We will see them fully embrace smart technology, and hopefully not just for their own operations, but eventually there'll be a need to plug in at the city level, to plug in with other utilities, and to really have everything being connected and optimized through smart technology. Want to bring up the notion of sector coupling. I know that's not used very often here in the United States. It's very popular in Europe and Germany, where I'm from, where utilities can play a role in helping different industries connect with each other and share their energy, their excess energy or energy that would otherwise be lost with each other through technology such as power to X, hydrogen fuels. So we think that utilities actually will play a very important role in the future in contributing to economic growth that way. Obviously, they've always contributed to economic growth, but this is a new area where there is future efficiencies to be gained that is really exciting to start thinking about. And then lastly, just to note that with hydrogen, water becomes an energy carrier. And depending on how big that will get, we think that will have implications for water utilities as well, because we'll need clean water to make hydrogen and then get clean water back as well. So in terms of governance, we're not talking a year or two from now, but somewhere down the road, maybe decades, but there will be more joint ventures and consolidations between utilities. And that includes electricity, gas, and water. Again, definition of success to be determined together.
So once more, welcome your thoughts on thinking about utilities. What else? Got a few summary examples here. Please drop your thoughts about utilities, a hot topic in all of our conversations. drop them into the chat or feel free to speak out. I believe we have some people from energy companies in the workshop today, so feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up if you'd like, or just drop it into the chat. Again, give you a little bit of time to think.
So good morning, everybody. This is Al Swintek with CenterPoint Energy. I'll just make a couple quick comments, if that's okay.
Please.
Regarding the smart technology, that is happening. There are smart meters that are being rolled out. I know Xcel Energy is doing that here locally. CenterPoint Energy is doing that down in Houston, where we operate both a gas and electric system. So there's a lot of that happening, and now we're starting to move toward a little bit more of a kind of a smart meter on the gas side. So we're going to be starting to roll that out as well. So that technology is happening. Regarding the reliable and affordable resource success metric that was on a slide or two before, that's for sure something that, you know, we're super always super cognizant of and working on, and you know, thinking hard about how to integrate our energy conservation goals with the need to also ensure that the system remains reliable and safe, obviously. So just a couple thoughts around all of that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Others? Feel free to drop them in the chat. Or go ahead and unmute yourselves and speak up. Emma, were you trying to get a word in edgewise here? Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Emma. I'm also from CenterPoint Energy, so I'll just piggyback on what Al was saying. But we work a lot in the space of climate and equity goals, both at the local and state level. We have very valuable partnerships with the cities, especially Minneapolis, and across various stakeholders and sectors where we are trying to work in this space of move a company that, you know, is part of that carbon challenge into the space of working towards shared goals to reduce carbon emissions in the state and at the local level too. So I just wanted to kind of bring up that the partnerships aspect, and that we kind of work a lot within that space with various partners to move some of these ideas forward.
Thank you. And extending the notion of utilities to also include things like broadband, right? There's been a lot of conversation in this state about the enormously complex equity issues around broadband access, particularly in Greater Minnesota. And there's progress, but not the way it should be given the demand and the need. So, other thoughts? Utilities.
Yeah, this is Patrick Hanlon. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to thank Emma. Yeah, working with the utilities, the city of Minneapolis has been working with both utilities on this partnership and looking at ways that we can invest in communities. And I think when talking about, you know, you just talked a little bit about externalities, and I think that's a key point on projects like this. And Jeff even alluded to it, is, you know, there's, as a developer, you know, he can't take into account the benefits or the costs of externalities when he's doing developments. And so Minneapolis has done a lot of work in this space. You know, we charge per ton of pollution for our industry here in Minneapolis, and we put that funding back into solutions that reduce pollution. We passed a 0.5% franchise fee to reinvest back into climate change solutions, putting the emphasis, the priority into green zones, into environmental justice communities. And we've recently passed the social cost of carbon that was passed last year as a way to price in the externality of the costs of pollution. And I think those are key pieces, and we're just starting down that road, right? And I think Minneapolis has done a lot of work around this. But that's a key piece of this is when we cost those things, someone also has to pay those items and those prices. And so that's, that if we are investing or incentivizing different projects, we have to weigh that out as to who's paying that and who's getting that money, and then what's the real return on investment in terms of dollars and jobs. And so I'll stop rambling, but I just want to add those points.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Do you want to tell people in the workshop your affiliation, please?
Oh, so, I'm sorry. I thought I did at the beginning. I'm the Director of Environmental Programs for the City of Minneapolis Health Department.
Thank you. So some conversations about broadband, conversations about solar, and especially putting in some incentives / requirements around solar on new homes and so on. Other thoughts? Feel free to put them in the chat. We'll move on to the next slide, but you can continue in the chat as you wish. Communities.
Yeah, thanks for that. I get lost in that conversation. It's really rich. So communities, so we're going to look at where we're now, where we're going to. Of course, those who have been with us in the first workshops are very well aware of kind of the status, but so we're just going to touch on it quickly because we want to have that same kind of conversation as we had on utilities and before. So past and current state. So we're looking at, where are we coming from? So a lot of neighborhoods are places where people sleep, the bedroom communities, it's not the vibrant communities that we often talk about, right? Residents experiencing historic levels of isolation and alienation. So loneliness is a big issue today. And fortunately, we're able to talk about it now. In our tough culture, our masculine culture, we can still now begin to talk about mental illnesses, and we need to design our way out of that. And that's part of restorative development. Sense of community is created and maintained by nonprofits. You see, nonprofits, the significance of nonprofits is kind of, they're filling a void that government isn't able to provide. So in a way, the number of nonprofits in a community is an indicator of the health of the community. Just wanted to keep that in mind. Governance, communities tend to be in a reactive, not proactive position. I think every mayor's dream is to have an engaged population, not reactive, not angry. So we have a lot of work to do there. Cities are often unable to effectively respond to community needs. Well, that's a fact in every city. But I think with COVID and George Floyd just exposed that at a very deep level in Minneapolis. Definition of success: to be heard and avoid the worst. Your opinion on that would be appreciated. So where are we going? Future state, communities as places where people of all ages live, work, play, and worship. This is from the 2040 goals, isn't it? Connections happen naturally through proximity of key institutions and amenities. This is what we've been talking about all the time here. That there has to be access to everything. Remember back in the day, we talked about it in the last workshop, where back in the day, people could live in poverty, but have a really high quality of life because everything they needed was close by. They would run into the neighbors on the street and children could play. It was high quality of life, arguably. I grew up in a community like that myself, and I loved it. It's just, I can't believe we moved away from that. Governance, so in the future, this is where we're going to, is that development happens in and with communities. Residents are stakeholders and shareholders in the community. So part of that restorative roadmap is to figure that out. How do we get that? How do we change to that way of being and operating our city and our region? and play various connector and implementer roles in restorative development. Who does what, remember? What's our roles and responsibilities? And then together we're going to define success. And
There you go, same question, thinking about communities, broadly speaking. The notion of stakeholder and shareholder in their own communities and co-creators, especially around the notion of equity in any kind of development. What are we missing? What else? Again, drop something in the chat or feel free to unmute yourselves and comment.
And I just want to say, I think this is Dan Coleman with the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. I think that, you know, I'm hearing many of these the organizations here are doing the right thing. They're doing it. They're making strides forward. And just as I think the watershed feels we're doing that already, we're really pressing to move ahead and do the best we can with the resources we have. And the key to all this for me is that we do not have the resources to look on a systems level basis outside of our organization and know what we're impacting beyond our field of view. And so to me, the essential part of this is really just saying that's the collective, that's the partnership piece of we need to start taking the next steps forward collectively and weighing out what those other impacts are, how our goals overlap and so on and so forth with each other. And then, you know, collectively come to understanding the externalities that we will avoid by assessing it outside of the silos that we operate in now. So that's really all. To me, that's maybe it seems simple on the surface to say that, but I think it's pretty powerful if we actually can do that and work towards a model and outcome that demonstrates that, and people can actually be on a site and experience what that means, and actually see in a much deeper way how that does change and free up resources for the city and so forth in other ways too. So just want to make that comment.
Thank you. And we've got some comments about, still some things about broadband, internet access, livable neighborhoods, and really striving, right, for excellence, not just kind of digging out from underwater, but going beyond that, right? Being aspirational. Aspirational means realistic. It doesn't mean this will never ever happen. It means you've got to aim for something that you really believe in order to move things forward.
This is Dick Gilliard from Towerside. And I just want to build on what Dan said. I think this idea of partnerships between MWMO and the wall companies and the community, working together with the city, we've been able to accomplish some amazing things around district stormwater management and on the verge of being able to implement a district energy system. But it takes tremendous staying power on the community side of things to stay at the table, because these things do cost, these efforts cost money for the research. It takes a lot of effort to make the political effort to make some of these things happen. But nevertheless, the strength of the partnership between the private developer and the agency, the MWMO, the city and the community demonstrates that if you have a vision for what you're trying to do, you can make it happen. And once we get a few of these models in place, I think the how-to will become much more evident to others and begin to multiply. So just wanted to underscore the importance and the strength of the partnerships across sectors. Thank you.
well said, Dick. may I remind everyone, I think people who've been with us through this project, we know that we can't be sustainable on our own. It takes a collected effort. Like industry cannot be sustainable on its own. An independent government agency cannot be sustainable on its own. It takes the whole to make that happen.
Thanks, Björkman. All righty, let's move on to the super fun stuff. Not that everything up to this point wasn't fun, but this gets even more fun. In this section, we'll do a little more introduction and lead in, and this is when we'll jump into this these cool exercises and move through them as quickly as we're able.
All right. You will hear a lot about the Minneapolis 2040 goals in this section, and probably almost all of you or all of you are already familiar with them. So this is how they're laid out on their website. And what we've done here just graphically is to overlay where we think that restorative development and district level systems in particular could act either as a contributor or as a catalyst. So especially the district level integration model we think could be a great catalyst towards the goals of living wage jobs, complete neighborhoods, the healthy, sustainable and diverse economy, the high quality physical environment, just to name those where we think we can truly make a big difference. But that is not to say that restorative development does not also contribute to all of these other goals. And we want to get to those nuances in the discussions that follow. Just as a reminder of how we've organized our workshops and our thinking, our assessment, here are the 11 KPIs that we measure with assets and resources starting on the right side. That's what we have as a city, as a society. We've optimized those in silos, but we think there's a lot to be gained by connecting them with each other. And those gains will then spill into the other areas. So our resource management, which is management governance, land use planning, IT, smart city, mobility and access and economy. And then lastly, we've measured the outcomes. So this is just a reminder of the framework because the next slide, the document that hopefully you had a chance to look at in advance is organized the same way. So on the left side, you will see our assets and resources. Then we get to resource management and we get to outcomes. And what we've done here is we have mapped to the best of our ability the Minneapolis 2040 goals. So those are in dark gray according to our 11 KPIs and the logic that we think is inherent in how we have structured the order of the KPIs. We've also gone through additional documents that are publicly available by the city, by our utilities, by other government agencies to map some of the very concrete measurable targets that are in support of these goals. So those are in the lighter gray. I really like them because often they're worded in a way that the average citizen, you and I, can remember. So kudos to the park board, for example. They have their goal of a 10-minute access to park for everyone. So these are the kind of goals that ideally we want to see more and more of because they're both measurable and they help us really understand what are we very concretely working towards. And then lastly, we've done just a quick exercise down there in yellow of mapping all of the policies that are included in the Minneapolis 2040 plan. There's about 100 of them. We've mapped them to each of these categories just to kind of get a sense of where the focus is in terms of policies and where maybe we could use a few more. So you'll see that represented as well.
I'll leave the poll up for just a couple more minutes. Dan, do you want to bring this to a close?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say we really do appreciate the time everyone's taken to walk through this series of workshops with us. We know it's a large time commitment, but we feel it's really important step that we all can make moving forward. So I look, hopefully we'll be seeing more of you, and you'll be following up with us on a partnership basis, and we can move towards some future work planning together and moving into phase 2 of the feasibility study that really gets to the design and nuts and bolts of working together again across all our different organizations to come up with something that fits the community and government sector as well as the private sector. Thanks. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone. It's noon, so we'll bring this to a close. But again, as I mentioned, we'll leave this on, leave the Zoom meeting up for a little bit, and the consultants will stay on the phone. So if you have further questions, feel free to stay on. Otherwise, we'll be back in touch soon. Thanks.